The story begins in a small town, where the streets were always busy with people rushing to work, cars honking, and shopkeepers calling out to sell their goods. But inside a little diner at the corner of the street, life was much slower. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread filled the air every morning. And in the middle of this routine world worked a young waitress named Emma, a girl with tired eyes but a smile that never left her face. Emma's life was not easy. She lived in a tiny apartment with walls so thin she could hear her neighbors arguing every night. The rent was high, the bills kept coming, and the paycheck she earned from the diner barely covered her basic needs. Every month she had to decide whether to pay for electricity first or buy enough groceries to last the week. And still she woke up early every day, tied her hair back neatly, and walked to the diner with the same determination, because she knew she had no choice. She had to work if she wanted to survive. Her uniform was old, a little faded from too many washes, but she kept it clean, ironing it late at night before going to bed. The shoes on her feet were worn out from walking back and forth across the diner floor, but she polished them anyway so they would shine in the light. She wanted to look presentable, even if her pockets were empty. When she greeted customers, she always carried a gentle voice and a warm smile, even if she had skipped breakfast herself, because she believed kindness didn't cost a thing. Emma was young, but life had already tested her. Her father had passed away years ago, leaving her mother to raise her and her younger brother alone. Her mother fell sick not long after, and Emma had to take on responsibility at an age when most people were still in school. She wanted to continue her studies, maybe become a nurse one day, but dreams often feel too heavy when reality is pressing down on your shoulders. Instead, she worked, sometimes 2 jobs, sometimes 3, always trying to keep her family together. At the diner, her day was filled with endless tasks. She wiped tables, carried heavy trays, poured coffee for customers who never looked her in the eye. Some were kind, leaving a small tip with a thank you, but many treated her like she was invisible, snapping their fingers if their food was late, complaining about things she had no control over. Still, she never argued, never let anger show on her face, because she knew that every dollar mattered, and losing a job was not an option. There were times when Emma felt tired to her bones, her back aching from standing all day, her hands dry from scrubbing dishes, her feet sore from running across the diner floor. Yet when she looked around, she would often notice someone else struggling too, maybe an old man sitting alone with only a cup of coffee, or a young mother counting coins before ordering a meal for her child. And in those moments, her heart softened. She understood what it meant to have little, and maybe that's why kindness came so naturally to her. On many afternoons, she would quietly set aside a piece of bread or a bowl of soup for someone who seemed hungry, even if it meant she had less to eat for herself. Her coworkers sometimes teased her, saying she was too soft-hearted, but Emma never cared. She had learned from her mother that when you give with love, life always finds a way to give back. Maybe not with money, but with peace in your heart. The people who passed through the diner never knew Emma's struggles. They saw only a cheerful young woman serving meals with patience. They did not know that after her shift, she would walk home in the cold because she couldn't afford a bus ticket. They did not know that sometimes she went to bed with only tea in her stomach because dinner was too expensive. They did not know that her dream of studying was folded away like an old letter in a drawer, waiting for the right time that never seemed to come. And yet, despite everything, she still smiled, still cared, still gave. One evening, after a long day of work, Emma sat by the kitchen door of the diner, holding the little lunch she had packed for herself. It wasn't much, just a sandwich and an apple. But it was all she could afford. As she ate slowly, she looked at the busy street outside, wondering if her life would always be this way, wondering if she would ever get a chance to rise above her struggles. Still, she told herself that even if life was tough, she wouldn't let it harden her heart. She wanted to be someone who lifted others, even if she herself was carrying heavy burdens. What made Emma special was not her beauty or her youth, but her spirit. She had a way of making people feel seen, even when the world ignored them. She remembered the names of customers. She listened when old ladies told her long stories. She smiled at children and gave them extra napkins with their ice cream. She believed small gestures could make a big difference. And though she had little in her wallet, her heart was always full. And so, every morning, Emma returned to the diner, ready to face another day of hard work, unaware that life was quietly watching her. unaware that her kindness would soon lead her to a moment that would change everything. For now, she only knew her struggles, her hunger, her fatigue, and her quiet determination to keep going. But fate was preparing a twist, one that would remind her and everyone else that goodness never goes unnoticed, and that even in the smallest corners of the world, kindness can light up the darkest days. It was a quiet afternoon at the little diner. The lunch rush had ended, and the clatter of plates had softened. Only a few customers sat scattered around the room, sipping their coffee or finishing their meals. Emma wiped down the counter slowly, her mind heavy with thoughts of rent and bills, but as always, she kept a gentle smile on her face. For her, every shift was the same, long hours of serving people who often forgot her name, yet she carried on with patience. That day, the bell above the door jingled softly, and Emma turned to see who had walked in. It was an elderly man. His clothes were old and worn. The coat on his shoulders looked 2 sizes too big, and his shoes had holes in them. He walked slowly, almost dragging his feet, as if each step was heavy. His hair was gray and messy, his beard untrimmed, his face tired. He looked like someone who had been through many hard years and had nowhere left to go. The man paused at the doorway for a moment, as if uncertain whether he should come inside. Some customers looked up briefly, then turned away, already whispering to each other. The old man's appearance drew quiet judgment. His clothes smelled faintly of the street. His hands looked rough. His eyes held both hunger and embarrassment. It was clear he was not the kind of customer diners usually welcomed, yet he shuffled forward slowly and chose the corner seat near the window, sitting with his head low. Emma watched him carefully, her heart softening immediately. She had seen many types of customers, some rich, some poor, but this man looked different, not just poor, but lonely, invisible, the kind of person people walk past on the street without noticing. She could see the way his eyes wandered toward the plates of food on other tables, the way he swallowed hard, as if the smell of warm soup and fresh bread was almost too much to bear. But when he opened the menu placed on his table, he closed it again quickly, his hands trembling slightly, because deep down he knew he couldn't order anything. The diner had grown quieter, and whispers floated through the air. 2 young men at another table laughed softly, pointing at the man's torn coat. A woman muttered under her breath about how people like him shouldn't come in and disturb paying customers. The old man pretended not to hear, but his shoulders slumped lower, as though every unkind glance weighed on him. Emma felt a sharp pain in her chest. She knew that kind of humiliation, the sting of being judged without anyone knowing your story. She picked up a glass of water and walked over to him with the same warm smile she gave everyone. "Good afternoon, sir," she said gently, placing the glass in front of him. "Can I get you something to eat today?" The old man lifted his tired eyes. There was hesitation in his voice as he whispered, I don't have money. I was just hoping to rest a little." His words were quiet, almost ashamed, like a child confessing a secret. Emma felt her throat tighten. She could tell he had not eaten properly in a long time. His hands trembled slightly as he held the glass of water, drinking as if even that was a blessing. Emma nodded softly. She didn't ask more. She didn't push him away like others might. Instead, she leaned down and said with kindness, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." And before the man could protest, she turned and walked to the kitchen, taking out the small lunch she had packed for herself. It wasn't much, just a bowl of soup, a piece of bread, and an apple, but it was enough to fill an empty stomach. When she returned, she placed the meal in front of him. "Here you go, sir. Please eat," she said. The man stared at the food, his eyes filling with disbelief, then slowly with tears. He looked up at Emma, his lips trembling. You're giving me your own meal?" he asked softly, his voice breaking. Emma smiled again. "I can eat later, but you need it more right now. Please, don't worry about me." The old man hesitated for only a moment before he picked up the spoon, his hands still shaking. The first sip of warm soup seemed to awaken something in him. His shoulders relaxed, his eyes closed briefly, as if savoring not just the taste but the kindness behind it. The bread disappeared quickly, and the apple too. All the while he kept glancing at Emma with a mixture of gratitude and wonder. He was not used to being treated this way. Most people avoided him, judged him, pushed him aside. But here was this young waitress, giving what little she had without expecting anything in return. Around the diner, reactions were mixed. A couple shook their heads in disapproval, muttering that Emma was wasting food on someone who couldn't pay. Others looked quietly impressed but said nothing. Emma ignored them all. Her focus remained on the old man, checking if he was comfortable, asking if he needed more water, talking to him like he was any other customer, treating him with dignity, something he had likely not felt in a long time. For the first time that day, the old man smiled, a small, fragile smile that revealed the boy he once had been. He told Emma his name was Henry, and though he didn't share much about his life, he thanked her repeatedly, saying, "People don't usually look at me kindly. You're different, young lady. You've given me more than food. You've given me respect." Emma's heart warmed at his words. She didn't see herself as doing anything special. To her, it was natural to help someone hungry, but she didn't know that this simple act, this meal shared on an ordinary afternoon, was about to set into motion something extraordinary. For this old man was not who he appeared to be. Behind the ragged clothes and tired eyes was a secret that would soon shock everyone in that diner, and most of all, change Emma's life forever. Henry sat quietly in the corner of the diner, eating the soup and bread Emma had given him. Every spoonful seemed to restore a little strength. His hands no longer shook as much. His eyes no longer looked so empty. But what touched him most was not the food itself. It was the way Emma treated him. She had not looked at him with pity. She had not asked embarrassing questions. She had spoken to him as though he were a valued guest, and that simple respect filled his heart in a way he had not felt in years. Emma returned to check on him every few minutes, refilling his water glass, asking softly if he needed anything else. Each time he shook his head, smiling faintly. His eyes wet with unshed tears. The diner around them carried on. Forks clinking, people chatting, but for Henry, it felt as if the world had paused. Here he was, an old man who had been ignored, laughed at, even avoided by strangers, and now a young waitress had shared her own meal just to make sure he was fed. The act was small, but to him it was enormous. He tried to speak, to thank her properly, but the words felt heavy in his throat. Finally he whispered, "You didn't have to do this, young lady. You must need that food yourself." Emma smiled gently, shaking her head. "I'll be fine. I can always eat later, but no one should go hungry when I have something to share." Her voice was calm, as if kindness was the simplest choice in the world. Henry studied her face, the tired eyes that still carried warmth, the smile that seemed to shine even through her own struggles, and he wondered how someone with so little could give so much. Around the diner, not everyone approved. One man muttered loudly that she was being foolish. Another woman scoffed, saying she would never waste her food on a beggar, but Emma paid no attention. She had learned long ago that kindness was not about what others thought. It was about what felt right in your heart, and right now, helping this man felt more important than saving her sandwich for later, so she stayed by his side a little longer, asking him gentle questions, listening to the small bits of his story he was willing to share, and for the first time in a long time, Henry felt seen. Henry's eyes softened as he looked at her, and though she didn't know it, a storm of emotions was stirring in his mind, because he was not what he appeared to be, beneath the ragged coat and untrimmed beard. He was a man of great wealth, a billionaire who could buy anything he wanted, yet what he sought most was something money could never guarantee: genuine kindness. He had grown tired of people who only smiled at him for his money, people who pretended to care just to earn his favor. So he disguised himself as a poor old man, walking into ordinary places, hoping to find a true heart in a world that seemed to have forgotten compassion. And here she was, this young waitress, giving her own meal without hesitation, expecting nothing in return, treating him not like a burden, but like a human being who mattered. It filled him with hope. It reminded him that goodness still existed, that not everyone was blinded by greed or selfishness. As he finished the last bite of bread, he realized that what Emma had done was far more valuable than any deal he had ever signed. Her kindness was priceless. Emma didn't know any of this. To her, Henry was just an old man in need of food. She didn't think of rewards. She didn't imagine recognition. She simply acted on instinct, her heart guiding her to do what was right. When Henry tried again to thank her, she touched his hand gently and said, "You don't need to thank me, sir. It makes me happy to help." Those words sank deep into his heart, leaving him almost speechless. How could she not realize how extraordinary she was? The diner slowly emptied, the whispers faded, and the sun outside dipped lower in the sky. Henry pushed away the empty bowl, feeling full not just in body but in spirit. Emma cleared the table, still smiling, though her own stomach was beginning to ache with hunger she had ignored. But she didn't mind. She had seen the relief in Henry's eyes, and that was enough for her. As she walked away to attend another table, Henry watched her with quiet admiration, his mind already turning with plans, because he knew he could not let this moment pass without honoring it. In that simple act of giving her meal, Emma had unknowingly passed a test Henry had been carrying out for years, one that revealed the true nature of people. Most had failed, brushing him aside, mocking him, refusing even a kind word. But Emma had succeeded without even knowing she was being tested. Her heart had spoken louder than appearances, louder than judgment, louder than hunger, and Henry knew he had finally found what he was searching for. As Emma returned to the counter, humming softly to herself, she thought of nothing beyond the next customer, the next table to clean, the next pot of coffee to pour. She did not realize that her life was about to change, that the small kindness she offered on that ordinary afternoon would ripple outward into something extraordinary. Henry rose slowly from his seat, thanking her one last time before shuffling out the door, but inside his heart, a decision had already been made, one that would soon surprise not only Emma, but everyone around her. For now, the moment remained simple. A young waitress had given her lunch to an old man, and in that act, two lives had quietly shifted, one finding hope, the other unknowingly walking toward a destiny far greater than she had ever imagined. When Henry stepped out of the diner that evening, the cold wind brushed against his face, his old coat barely keeping him warm, but his heart was burning with emotions he hadn't felt in a long time. He walked slowly down the street, replaying the moment again and again, the way Emma had placed her own lunch in front of him, the way she had smiled without hesitation, the way she treated him like a person who mattered, not just a poor stranger in ragged clothes. For most people, it might have seemed like a small act, but for Henry, it meant everything. Because the truth was, Henry was not really the man he appeared to be. The dirt on his coat, the holes in his shoes, the messy hair and beard, all of it was part of a disguise. Underneath the tired face of a poor old man was someone very different. Henry was one of the wealthiest men in the city. A billionaire who owned companies, buildings, and land. People bowed when they saw him in his true form. They offered him the best seat at the table. They served him the finest meals. And yet, none of it gave him peace, because deep inside, he longed to know if kindness still existed in a world so often ruled by greed. Over the years, Henry had grown tired of empty smiles and fake friendships. He had seen how people changed when they discovered his wealth. Their voices grew sweeter, their manners softer, but their eyes were always fixed on his fortune. It hurt him deeply, because he wanted something no money could buy. He wanted sincerity. He wanted someone to see him not for his money, but for who he was. So he began testing people in his own unusual way. He would leave behind his fine suits and luxury cars, put on worn-out clothes, and walk into ordinary places as a poor man. Sometimes he would ask for directions. Sometimes he would simply sit in a park, and sometimes, like today, he would enter a small diner, waiting to see how strangers reacted. Most of the time, the results broke his heart. People turned away, people sneered. Some even chased him out as though his presence was an insult. It made him wonder if kindness had disappeared from the world altogether. But still, he kept trying, hoping that one day he might find a heart that was pure. And now, in that tiny diner, he had found her. A young waitress who had nothing to spare, and yet gave everything she had. Henry thought of the way Emma's eyes had shone with kindness, the way she had ignored the cruel whispers of other customers, the way she had spoken with respect instead of pity. It touched him in a way no luxury ever could. Her kindness was not forced, it was natural, and for the first time in years, Henry felt a spark of hope. As he walked through the city streets, blending in with the crowd of ordinary people, he thought of her life. He had noticed the weariness in her eyes, the faded uniform, the way she moved with quiet exhaustion. He guessed that her days were long and her nights restless, that her struggles were many, and yet she chose to give. It amazed him, because he had known wealthy men who refused to part with a single coin, and here was a young woman giving her only meal without thinking twice. He knew then that she was different. She was exactly the kind of person he had been searching for. Henry returned to his home that night, a grand mansion hidden behind tall gates, a world completely opposite from the little diner. The moment he stepped inside, servants rushed to greet him, offering to take his coat, preparing his favorite meal, asking about his day, but none of it mattered. He waved them away and sat quietly by the fire, still thinking of Emma, her face, her smile, her kindness. He realized that his test had finally brought him the answer he was looking for. There was still goodness in the world. There was still someone who would help a stranger with no thought of reward. He decided then that he would not let her act go unnoticed. He would return to the diner, but not as the poor man she had fed. He would return as himself, the man the world knew, the billionaire with influence and power, and he would reveal the truth, but more than that, he would reward her not because she asked, but because he wanted her to know that kindness, even in the smallest form, can change lives. That night, as Henry lay in his bed, he smiled for the first time in a long while, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He thought of how surprised Emma would be, how the people who had mocked her would react when they saw who he really was, and most of all, how her life would change when she learned the truth. For Henry had the power to give her more than she had ever dreamed of, and he intended to do just that back at the diner. Emma finished her shift, unaware of the storm she had stirred in Henry's world. She walked home in the chilly night, her stomach empty but her heart strangely content. She thought only of the old man's grateful smile, never imagining who he really was, never imagining that her simple act of kindness had set into motion a chain of events that would transform her life forever. The world often hides its biggest surprises in the most ordinary moments, and as Emma fell asleep that night in her tiny apartment, and Henry planned his return from the comfort of his mansion, fate was quietly weaving their stories together, preparing a reveal that would shock everyone, and prove once again that kindness has a power far greater than wealth. The little diner that day was not as quiet as Emma might have hoped. Though the lunch rush had passed, the whispers had not faded. Every customer had seen what happened. Every pair of eyes had noticed the young waitress giving away her own meal to a stranger who looked too poor to buy even a cup of coffee, and while Emma had brushed it off as a small act, to everyone else it became the center of gossip. At one corner table, two men leaned toward each other, shaking their heads with disbelief. One of them muttered, "Can you believe that girl just gave away her lunch? She probably doesn't even earn enough for herself." The other chuckled, "Foolish, isn't it? Feeding someone who won't ever pay her back, what's the point?" Their laughter was low but sharp, like tiny needles meant to sting, and Emma could hear it clearly, yet she chose not to look their way. Across the room, a middle-aged woman stirred her tea slowly, her lips pursed in disapproval. "Some people don't know how to mind their own business," she whispered to the person next to her. "What if that man causes trouble? Bringing him food only encourages beggars to hang around, and then real customers will stop coming." Her companion nodded, sighing, as though Emma's kindness had somehow threatened the safety of the diner itself. But not every reaction was negative. In another booth, an older couple watched quietly, their eyes soft. The husband leaned closer to his wife and said, "You don't see that kind of heart often these days. She gave him food without a second thought." His wife nodded with a faint smile. "Yes, reminds me of the old days, when neighbors shared even if they had little. The world could use more people like her." Their words were gentle, almost like a blessing drifting into the air. Even the other waitresses in the diner had their own opinions. One of them, tired from her own shift, rolled her eyes and muttered, "Emma is always too nice. One day she'll regret it. Kindness doesn't pay the bills." Another waitress, younger and more impressionable, looked at Emma with quiet admiration, whispering, "I think it was beautiful. I don't think I'd have the courage to give away my own food like that." Their voices carried the mix of envy, judgment, and admiration that often follows selfless acts. Emma herself tried to ignore the chatter. She moved from table to table, pouring coffee, clearing dishes, taking orders, all while pretending she didn't hear the whispers that followed her. But deep inside, she felt them. She felt the sting of judgment, the mocking laughter, the disapproving stares. Still, she reminded herself why she had done it. The memory of Henry's tired eyes lighting up when he tasted the warm soup was enough to silence the noise in her heart. She knew hunger, she knew struggle, and she knew she would do it again without hesitation. Henry, sitting quietly in the corner, noticed the reactions too. He saw the way some people sneered at Emma, the way others looked at her with quiet respect, It was like watching two sides of humanity collide in one small diner: selfishness and compassion, judgment and kindness, cruelty and understanding. He realized then how rare Emma's act truly was, because it takes courage to be kind when the world is watching and criticizing. And Emma had shown that courage without even realizing it. As he finished the last bite of bread, Henry's heart grew heavier, not with sadness but with determination. He had seen enough to confirm what he already suspected. This young woman was different. Her kindness was not just an act, it was her nature, and even when others whispered and laughed, she stood firm in her choice, offering dignity to a stranger no one else wanted to acknowledge. It was a kind of bravery Henry had not seen in years. Meanwhile, the whispers continued, growing louder once Henry left the diner. Some customers sighed with relief, saying they hoped he would not return. Others scoffed at Emma, calling her naive. A few even left smaller tips out of irritation, as if punishing her for showing compassion. But there were also those who looked at her with new eyes, quietly leaving a little extra money on the table. Their way of saying thank you without words. Emma accepted it all silently, not showing her hurt, not boasting about her kindness, simply carrying on with her work as though nothing unusual had happened. Yet the truth was, something unusual had happened. The diner itself felt different after that moment, divided between those who mocked and those who admired. Emma had become a quiet example, her small act exposing the hearts of everyone around her. Some showed their coldness, others revealed their warmth, and all of it unfolded in the space of a single afternoon. When her shift finally ended, Emma walked out into the evening air, the whispers of the day still clinging to her. She was tired, her stomach still empty, but she carried no regret. She thought of Henry's grateful smile, of the way his trembling hands had steadied once he ate, and that memory filled her with more satisfaction than any meal could. She whispered to herself, it was the right thing to do, and kept walking toward her tiny apartment. Back inside the diner, the conversations lingered, customers and co-workers alike retelling the small scene as if it were a great drama. No one knew who Henry really was, no one guessed the truth behind the ragged coat. They saw only an old poor man and a waitress who dared to care. But soon, very soon, their whispers would turn into gasps of shock, because the story was not finished, the test was not over, and Emma's kindness was about to echo far beyond the four walls of that little diner. For now, though, the world saw only what it wanted to see. Some mocked, some admired, and some remained silent. But Emma herself walked home quietly, unaware that her simple act had not only touched a lonely heart, but had also set the stage for a revelation that would silence every whisper and turn judgment into awe. The next morning at the little diner began like any other. The air was filled with the smell of coffee brewing and fresh bread warming in the oven. Emma tied her apron tightly, tucked her hair back, and began setting tables, her eyes a little heavy from another sleepless night, but her smile still gentle as always. To her, today was just another day of serving strangers and working for tips. She had no idea what was about to happen. No idea that the quiet act of kindness she had shown the day before would come back in a way she could never imagine. Around mid-morning, as the diner grew busy with chatter and the clinking of cups, a strange sound rolled down the street. The deep hum of expensive car engines. People outside stopped walking, turning their heads as a sleek line of black luxury cars approached, their polished surfaces shining in the sun. They slowed and came to a stop right outside the diner. The doors opened, and sharply dressed men in suits stepped out, their shoes shining, their posture commanding. Whispers began instantly. Inside the diner, customers pressed against the windows, confused and curious. Emma was carrying a tray of coffee when the diner's door opened, and in walked the same old man from yesterday, only he didn't look the same anymore. Gone was the ragged coat, the torn shoes, the messy beard. In their place was a perfectly tailored suit that looked more expensive than anything Emma had ever seen. His hair was combed neatly, his shoes polished, his posture tall and confident. Behind him followed assistants in suits, their eyes scanning the room carefully, as though they were guarding someone important. The diner fell silent. The only sound was the bell above the door slowly jingling before fading away. Customers who had mocked him the day before now stared with wide eyes, their mouths half open. Unable to believe this was the same man they had laughed at. One of the waitresses dropped her pen in shock. Another gasped, whispering to a customer, "That's him. That's the same man Emma gave her food to." The gossip spread through the diner like wildfire. disbelief written on every face. Emma stood frozen, the tray of coffee still in her hands, her heart racing. She could hardly process what she was seeing. The old man she had fed with her own lunch was no longer poor. He was someone powerful, someone important, someone who belonged to a world completely different from hers. And when his eyes met hers, he smiled. Not the weary smile from yesterday, but a warm, confident smile filled with gratitude. The assistants moved aside, clearing a path for him, and he walked directly to the counter where Emma stood, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Every eye in the diner followed him, every whisper paused. He stopped in front of Emma, looking at her with the same softness as before, but now surrounded by the glow of wealth and authority. His voice was stronger than yesterday, but still kind as he said, "I came back because I couldn't leave without telling you who I truly am." Emma blinked, unsure of what to say. Her lips parted but no words came out. The man continued, turning slightly to address everyone in the diner. "Yesterday, I came here dressed as a poor man, hungry and tired. I wanted to see if kindness still lived in the world. Most people ignored me. Some even mocked me. But this young woman," he gestured toward Emma. "She gave me her own meal, the food she had packed for herself, and she gave it with no hesitation. No questions, no judgment, only kindness." Gasps rippled through the diner. People exchanged stunned looks. Those who had laughed yesterday now lowered their eyes in shame. The couple who had admired Emma beamed with pride, and the other waitresses stood frozen, their mouths dry. The man went on, his voice steady and powerful. "What none of you knew is that I am Henry Wallace, a businessman, a man of wealth, but none of that matters, because what I have been searching for all these years is a true heart, someone who sees beyond appearances, someone who shows kindness without expecting anything in return. And yesterday, I found that in her." Emma felt her cheeks flush, her hands trembling slightly. She wanted to speak, but still no words came. The diner filled with a new kind of silence, the silence of awe. Henry turned back to her and smiled softly. "You shared your meal with me when I was hungry, Emma, and today I want to share something with you. Because kindness like yours deserves to be seen. It deserves to be rewarded." The customers whispered louder now, some still in disbelief, some in envy, some in admiration. The two men who had laughed at Emma yesterday stared at their cups, ashamed. The woman who had complained about beggars sat stiff, her face red, and the younger waitress who had admired Emma's courage looked at her with wide, shining eyes, as if witnessing a dream come true. The entire diner had transformed into a stage, with Emma at the center and Henry revealing himself like the lead of a play. Emma finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling, You're not poor?" Henry chuckled warmly, shaking his head. "No, child, not poor in money, but yesterday, I was poor in spirit, and you reminded me of what wealth truly means. Your kindness gave me more than any fortune ever could." His words carried through the diner like music, touching even the coldest hearts. Some customers dabbed at their eyes, realizing they had judged too quickly, realizing they had witnessed something rare. Emma stood there, her heart racing, her mind spinning. Never in her life had she imagined something like this. The man she thought was just a hungry stranger was in fact someone whose name might be known across the city. Someone with power. Someone who had chosen her kindness as the light in his story. She didn't know whether to cry or laugh. She only knew her world had shifted, and the eyes of everyone in the diner proved it. Outside, the luxury cars waited, shining under the sun. Inside, Emma's life had quietly changed forever. And though she didn't yet know how far this moment would go, she felt deep in her heart that the act she had thought was small had just turned into something far bigger than she could have dreamed. The diner was so quiet that morning you could hear a pin drop. Every customer, every worker, every pair of eyes was fixed on Emma and the man standing before her, the poor old stranger from yesterday was no longer poor. He was Henry Wallace, a billionaire whose name appeared in newspapers, whose companies built tall towers in the city, whose wealth could buy anything money could reach, and yet here he was, standing in a simple diner, speaking gently to a young waitress who had shared her own lunch with him. Henry's voice carried warmth as he looked at Emma. "You gave me kindness when I had nothing, and I want to give you something now, not because you asked, but because you deserve it." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter, as if she needed to hold onto something real. Her whole body trembled. She had never imagined her small act would bring her to a moment like this. The whispers around the diner grew louder. People leaning in to hear, waiting for what Henry would say next. He gestured toward his assistants, and one of them stepped forward holding an envelope, its edges crisp and clean. Henry placed it gently on the counter in front of Emma. "Inside this envelope," he said, "is enough money to clear all your debts, pay your rent, and make sure you never go to bed hungry again." Emma's breath caught. She stared at the envelope as though it were glowing. Unable to move her hand toward it, she shook her head slightly, whispering, "I can't take this. I don't deserve this." Henry smiled kindly. "That is exactly why you do deserve it, Emma. You gave me your own food without thinking of yourself. You treated me with dignity when everyone else turned away. People like you are rare, and the world needs to see that kindness is not forgotten." His words were gentle but strong, like a father speaking to his child. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She had spent her life giving, even when she had so little, and now, for the first time, someone was giving back to her. "The envelope was only the beginning," Henry continued. "I want to do more than just pay your bills. Emma, I want to give you a chance to live your dreams." The diner buzzed with shock. Gasps escaped from every corner. Some customers leaned forward eagerly. Others sat back in awe. Emma's lips trembled as she whispered, My dreams." Henry nodded. "Yes, tell me. What have you always wanted but never had the chance to do?" Emma's mind swirled. She thought of her younger self, sitting by the window with schoolbooks she never finished. She thought of her brother she had helped raise. The endless nights working. The mornings walking to the diner with an empty stomach. She thought of the quiet dream she had carried for years, folded away in her heart. She whispered softly, "I wanted to study. I wanted to become a nurse one day, but life didn't allow it." Her voice cracked, embarrassed to say it out loud, as if her dream was too small in the presence of such a powerful man. Henry's eyes softened. "A nurse?" he repeated with admiration. "Someone who heals, someone who helps others. No wonder your heart is so generous, Emma. You were born to care for people." Then he spoke firmly. "Consider your dream alive again. I will pay for your education. Every book, every class, every expense, until you wear that white coat with pride." His voice rang through the diner like a promise carved in stone. Emma covered her mouth with her hands, tears spilling down her cheeks. The younger waitress standing nearby began crying too. Unable to hold back her emotions, customers who had mocked Emma the day before now sat in silence, shame heavy in their eyes. The older couple who had admired her act of kindness smiled through their own tears, nodding as if to say this was justice. This was what goodness deserved. But Henry was not done. He looked around the diner, making sure everyone heard. "And there is one more thing, Emma. Yesterday you gave me your lunch, and today I want to give you something even greater. I will also fund the opening of your own little cafe. A place where you can work not just as a waitress but as the owner. A place where your kindness can continue to touch lives every single day." The room erupted in murmurs. The disbelief was too much. Some clapped, others gasped, but all eyes returned to Emma, whose tears now flowed freely. She tried to protest again, shaking her head, whispering, "It's too much. I can't take all of this." But Henry gently touched her shoulder, his voice steady. "It is not too much. It is exactly what you deserve, and I will not take no for an answer. Yesterday you gave me dignity when I had none. Today I give you back the chance to live the life you always dreamed of." The assistant stepped closer, handing over documents and promises already prepared. Henry had planned everything since the moment he walked out of the diner yesterday, and now he was making good on it. Emma's co-workers stood speechless, their eyes darting between her and Henry, realizing they were witnessing a story that would be told for years. The whispers of doubt had turned into murmurs of amazement. The diner itself felt transformed, like holy ground where kindness had been rewarded. Before everyone's eyes, Emma finally wiped her tears and whispered, Thank you for believing in me." Her voice trembled but carried deep sincerity. Henry smiled. "No, Emma, thank you for reminding me what true wealth really means." His words hung in the air, touching not just Emma, but every soul in the diner, because in that moment, everyone understood that kindness, even in the smallest form, had the power to change lives, not just for the one who received it, but for everyone who witnessed it. And so, on that ordinary morning, in a small diner tucked into the corner of the city, the reward of kindness unfolded. A young waitress who had nothing gave away her meal, and in return, she was given not just money, not just gifts, but the chance to rewrite her life, to rise above her struggles, to follow her dreams. The whispers of judgment from yesterday were now silenced by the sound of awe and admiration, and Emma's story became living proof that kindness never goes unnoticed. The news of what happened in the little diner spread faster than anyone could have imagined. By the end of the week, almost everyone in town had heard the story of Emma, the waitress who gave away her meal to a poor old man, and how that old man turned out to be Henry Wallace, one of the wealthiest men in the city. People who once passed the diner without a second glance now stopped at the windows, pointing and whispering. Some came in just to see Emma with their own eyes, curious about the girl whose kindness had touched a billionaire's heart. Inside, the diner felt different too. The air carried a kind of quiet respect. Customers who once ignored Emma now smiled at her, speaking to her kindly. Some even left larger tips than usual, not because she asked, but because they wanted to be part of her story. They wanted to show they admired what she had done. The same people who had mocked her for feeding Henry now avoided her gaze, embarrassed by their own cruelty. Their whispers had turned into silence, and their silence spoke louder than words. Emma herself was still trying to understand it all. She walked to work each day like before, tied her apron, and carried trays of coffee and plates of food. But her heart felt lighter, as if the heavy weight she had carried for years was finally lifting. She could pay her bills now, she could dream again, and yet what made her happiest was not the money or the promises of a new future. It was the simple fact that her kindness had mattered, that it had touched someone deeply, that it had proven something good about the world. Henry visited her again, not in disguise this time, but as himself. He came not with a crowd of assistants but with a gentle smile. He sat in the same corner seat where she had first fed him, and together they talked, not as billionaire and waitress, but as two people who had shared a moment that changed them both. He told her how her act reminded him of his childhood, when his mother taught him to always share food, even when there was little on the table. He confessed how lonely his wealth had made him, how he longed for sincerity, and how she had given it freely without even knowing who he was. Emma listened quietly, her eyes full of compassion. She told him about her struggles, her long shifts, her dreams of studying, her hope of helping others as a nurse. Henry nodded with admiration, promising again to stand by her until her dreams came true. And though the world outside saw him as a billionaire rewarding a poor girl, inside the diner they were simply two souls who had reminded each other of what really mattered in life. The town buzzed with the story. People debated it in shops, in schools, in offices. Some said Emma was lucky, others said Henry was wise, but most agreed on one thing. The story was a lesson for everyone. A lesson that kindness, no matter how small, carries power. A lesson that how we treat strangers reveals more about us than any riches ever could. Children repeated the story to one another like a fairy tale. Parents reminded their kids that goodness always finds its way back. And for the first time in a long time, the town spoke more about compassion than gossip. Emma's co-workers at the diner also changed. The ones who had rolled their eyes at her kindness now watched her with respect. Some even began to soften themselves, offering small smiles to customers they once ignored. One young waitress admitted quietly, "Emma, you've made me want to be better." And Emma, with her usual humility, only smiled and said, "Kindness doesn't cost anything, but it gives so much back." Her words lingered with them, echoing even after their shifts ended. Henry, true to his promise, began the steps to fund Emma's education, arranging classes, setting up accounts, preparing her for the path she had thought was lost forever. He also helped her prepare for the cafe he wanted her to own, walking her through plans, showing her locations, making her part of every decision. Emma was overwhelmed, but she never let pride overtake her. She stayed grounded, remembering that everything began with a single bowl of soup and a piece of bread. She told herself never to forget that moment, never to let success change her heart. And so the story of Emma and Henry became more than just an event. It became a symbol, proof that goodness survives even in a world that often feels cold, proof that one act of kindness can ripple outward, touching not just 2 lives but hundreds, maybe even thousands, because when people heard the story, they carried it with them, they retold it, they lived differently, even if just for a day. They thought twice before turning away from someone in need. They remembered Emma, the girl who gave her meal away. For Emma, life moved forward in ways she never imagined. But she never forgot who she was. She still smiled at strangers, still offered help quietly, still believed in the power of small good deeds. Only now, she carried with her the knowledge that even the smallest kindness can change the course of life itself. She had lived it, she had seen it, and she had become living proof of it. As for Henry, he continued his life of wealth and power, but something inside him had healed. He no longer felt so alone. He no longer doubted the goodness of people, because he had found it shining in the eyes of a young waitress, and he carried that memory with him like a treasure more valuable than gold. Whenever he looked at his business empire, he reminded himself of Emma's sandwich and soup, and he told his associates, "Money can build buildings, but kindness builds humanity." His words left an impression, even in boardrooms where kindness was rarely spoken of. And so, the story closed not with riches or fame, but with a lesson that touched every soul who heard it. Kindness is never wasted. It may be ignored, it may be mocked, it may even be hidden for a time, but in the end, it always finds its way back, sometimes in the most surprising ways, sometimes in the most life-changing ways. Emma's kindness had lit a spark, and that spark burned brighter than any wealth, leaving behind a story that the town, and perhaps the whole nation, would never forget.